In the Middle Ages, people who today would be described as disabled existed in a world without the vocabulary, or often the sympathy, for their conditions. There were no official support systems, no state-funded institutions, and no disability rights. Instead, these individuals were mostly left to the care of family, religious communities, or occasionally charitable strangers. Modern terms like disabled or handicapped simply didn't exist. Instead, people were categorized by their perceived limitations: the blind, the deaf, the mad, the crippled, the leper. Medieval England had no unified view of how to treat these individuals. Some remained in their villages, surviving on pity, labour, or faith. Others were pushed to society's margins. And when that wasn't possible, when families couldn't support them, they ended up in the streets, on the road, or in places built more to contain than to heal. Let's take a closer look at what life was like for someone living with physical or mental impairments in this brutal yet fascinating chapter of human history. During the early Middle Ages, Christian theology viewed suffering as a symptom of sin. A twisted spine, a missing limb, or a confused mind could be seen not just as a physical issue, but as a spiritual one, a sign that someone, somewhere, had strayed from God's path. For the healthy and devout, charity was an act of penance. Giving to the poor, sick, or infirm wasn't done out of compassion so much as out of fear for their own souls. In 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council made it official. Before any doctor treated a sick person, a priest had to tend to their soul. The logic was cruelly straightforward: heal the sin, and maybe the body will follow. For those with long-term or incurable conditions, this essentially condemned them to spiritual suspicion. Your deformity, your suffering, your mental confusion, these weren't just medical problems. They were seen as divine messages. Historian Irina Metzler suggests that the word impairment better reflects how people were categorized in this era. Instead of a unified disabled identity, there were sensory impairments like blindness or deafness, physical impairments like paralysis or deformity, and cognitive or psychiatric conditions, which were often lumped together as madness or idiocy. Societal reactions ranged from indifference to cruelty. In 15th century France, blind men were once paraded through the streets, given sticks, and let loose in an enclosed space with a pig. Whoever killed the pig could keep it. The real entertainment, however, came not from the hunt, but from the chaos. Blind men swinging wildly, often striking each other rather than the animal. The show was a public spectacle, advertised the night before with drums and banners. People didn't come for justice, they came for the laugh. And yet, even in this grim landscape, contradictions flourished. The same society that mocked the blind also built hospitals for them, often funded by those responsible for their maiming. William the Conqueror, known for ordering the blinding of his enemies, also helped establish facilities for the care of the blind. Power and penance often went hand in hand. By the 12th century, new voices began to shift the conversation. St. Francis of Assisi, for example, preached radical empathy. He touched lepers with his bare hands. He lived among the poor. For him, to care for the sick wasn't just duty, it was divine. His influence reshaped parts of Christian practice, leading monasteries and convents to open their doors more regularly to the ill, the aged, and the impaired. Hospitals evolved slowly, often attached to religious institutions. Many were still basic by modern standards, more shelter than treatment centre, but they offered beds, food, and spiritual care. Some, like the Elsing in London, focused specifically on blind or paralysed priests. Others admitted a mix: lepers, epileptics, people called idiots, and the physically frail. Some locations even specialised. St James's in Chichester hosted a curious mix: 6 cripples, 2 legless people, and 2 idiots, the language of the time, not ours. More hospitals sprang up as the Middle Ages progressed. By the 14th century, England had hundreds. Some were small and humble, others like St. Leonard's in York housed over 200 people. Leprosy, perhaps the most feared disease of the era, prompted the creation of hundreds of leprosaria, or leper hospitals, across Europe. Though often built on the outskirts of towns, lepers weren't entirely cast out. They were allowed to beg, to pray, and to trade. Some even believed they were closer to God, already suffering their purgatory on earth. For many donors, giving to a leper was a spiritual investment. Fear was never far away in medieval times. When plague and panic gripped communities, those already on the fringes, like lepers, became convenient scapegoats. In France, in the year 1321, hundreds of lepers were accused of conspiring to poison wells. No evidence, no trial, just hysteria. They were arrested, tortured, and publicly burned alive. Fear, not reason, ruled the streets. England wasn't much different. In 1346, at the height of the Black Death, King Edward III banned lepers from entering London. These were not criminals, they were sick, impoverished, and outcast. But instead of being helped, they were pushed away, deemed dangerous and unclean. And yet, not every tale from this era is one of cruelty. Some disabled individuals found ways to adapt. One blind man from France famously refused to pray for his sight to return. His reason? Blindness gave him an advantage when begging. People responded to what they could see. If he regained his vision, he feared he'd be ignored. Still too old to work, but no longer seen as worthy of charity. By the late Middle Ages, people with impairments remained on the margins of society, but they were also deeply woven into its everyday fabric. They were feared and pitied, mocked yet sometimes cared for. Their presence was a reminder of suffering, faith, and the fragility of the human body and soul. Monasteries began to offer more consistent refuge. Orders inspired by figures like St. Francis of Assisi welcomed the sick and disabled, believing service to the weak was service to Christ. Hospitals, though basic, began to specialise, some for lepers, others for the blind, the mentally ill, or the physically impaired. In some towns, there were even designated houses where the poor and disabled could live with dignity, or at least survive without persecution. Still, even within this patchwork of charity, the line between compassion and spectacle was thin. In some places, blind men were used in public games, given sticks and sent into an arena with a pig to fight for food. People came not to support them, but to laugh. Their pain was entertainment. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the darker corners of the Middle Ages. If you appreciate history that doesn't sugarcoat the past, subscribe to Medieval Madness. We release new episodes every Friday. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and never stop questioning what you think you know about history.